do Ashkenazim have 6 zechirot that they have to say every day, and Sephardim have 10?
The question is about the 6 zechiros versus the 10 zechiros. And these are simply places in the Torah where the Torah says you shall remember, such as remembering Shabbos, remembering Har Sinai, remembering Mitzrayim. Now, the truth of the matter is there is no obligation to recite it at all. It's not part of the official davening. We're supposed to remember it, but we're not mechuyev to say it. But many people have a minhag, and it's printed in Sidurim after Shachris. So in Ashkenazim Siddur, look in an art scroll, it'll say Sheish Zechiros, 6 verses of remembrance. Sephardim have hechsher. Now, do you remember offhand what are the extra ones? Just remind me because. I'm gonna have to look. I mean,
Check real quick.
let's look a quick thing because off the top of my head I don't remember. But you have a Sephardi? You have a Sephardi Siddur?
I wouldn't mind back right here.
Okay, so let's. It's a bad thing where you don't remember the zechiros. I don't remember the zechiros. Let's compare it. It'd be nice to. This is right. Okay. 1 second.
I got him here when you're.
Okay, so bring me that one.
Remembering Hashem that if you want to give you strength, patience,
Yep.
not one.
So the all right. So these are the 10 zechir. Okay, these are the 10, and give me an Ashkenaz one.
It's funny, I mama looked into this like 6 weeks ago and I forgot.
Okay, thank you. So let's do the Ashkenaz one first because all 6 of them are in the list of 10. You have to remember Yetzias Mitzrayim every day. You have to remember Har Sinai every day. You have to remember the evil of Amalek every day. You have to remember the Maaseh HaEgel, that we made Hashem angry and we had to do tshuva. Remember what Hashem did to Miriam, which is really remembering Lashon Hara, that it can cause tremendously bad things. Remember Shabbos to keep it holy. Okay, those are the 6. So what do we add here? Yetzias Mitzrayim is the same. Shabbos is the same. Okay, Amalek is the same. Ma'amad Har Sinai is the same. Angering Hashem with the Egel is the same. Miriam is the same. Okay, so what is added? What is added is remembering that the man fell in the desert. That is added. Remember in a general way that Hashem is the one that gives you koach to do valorous things. And the final one is remember Yerushalayim, which will be rebuilt b'mheira v'yameinu. Amen. So a few things. So in the Ashkenazic list, we don't mention remembering the man. Okay? So the question would be, why don't we mention remembering the man? Because, the short answer would be because the man itself was a temporary phenomenon. In other words, it's similar to what the Rambam says. The Rambam says in the Sefer HaMitzvos that we don't count as a mitzvah anything that only applied for one generation. So, for example, even though the Torah says you're not allowed to leave the man over until the morning, and that's a negative commandment. Thou shalt not leave over the man. Why don't we count that as one of the 613? Because it's not a permanent zikaron. It only happened for that particular generation. So the same logic that the Rambam says, although he was Sephardi, the same logic that the Rambam says that we don't count it as a mitzvah, not leaving over the man, we would not count it as one of these zechiros that we have to have all the time. That would be man. Now then, the next one that's different is remember Balak and Bilam, what they tried to do to us. All right, so here I have a simple answer, and that is the statement that we have to remember the sin of Bilam is not a pasuk in the Torah. It's a pasuk in Micha. In other words, the Ashkenazim are kolel in the 6 zechiros, only those things that the Torah itself said, thou shalt remember. What the Sfardim are doing is, they're taking all of Tanakh, and whenever it says remember it, they're going to put it in. So the same thing is for the one that says, remember Yerushalayim. Once again, the Torah itself does not have a phrase, remember Yerushalayim. All right, so I think that's going to be so the man is based on temporary, and the other ones are based on using the rest of Nevi'im and Kesuvim for Zikaron, while our Sheish, Sechiros, and Ashkenazic Siddur only talk about the Lashon HaTorah that says Lashon of Zikaron. So that would be a little bit of a difference. Maybe it goes back to the fact, I shouldn't make a joke, that Ashkenazim stopped learning Nach by the time the Sheish, Sechiros were written, so we only mentioned the Chumash.
And Miriam wouldn't be...
No, so Miriam is included in both. No, the Torah says, remember what was done to Miriam in the desert.
I thought the man was also...
The which one?
I thought man was also in the Torah.
No, man is in the Torah, but then I gave a different idea that the man was a temporary thing. In other words...
And Miriam wasn't temporary?
No, Miriam was not temporary because I remember Miriam, so I'll keep in mind the chaimer of Avodah Zarah. Of Lashon Hara. So the lesson derived from Miriam is an eternal zikaron.
And remembering Hashem because he's the one that gave you koach to Osir Chayil?
Yeah. So I think the answer there also is that I don't think, no, that's in the Chumash. Well, it's in the Chumash that God gives you koach, but it doesn't use the verb zechira. In other words, it just says Hashem gives you koach, and they just put in remember that. But that's a remember that where the Torah doesn't use a lashon of remember that. You see, they just took an important idea. Now, once you're doing that, though, then you can have a million things. Remember that Hashem is one. Now, it doesn't say in the Chumash, remember that Hashem is one. It just says Hashem is one. So I'm not sure why selectively they do it, but apparently they're even using things that don't have the word Zechira Bichlal, but things that you're supposed to remember. It could also be they wanted the number 10 because of the 10 Sfiros, or they wanted 10 because of the Aseres Hadibros, so they wanted to come up with 10 based on some cheshbon like that. But I'll think about it some more. It's a good question. Yeah.
Here's a sentence. Should we as Jews support a secular death penalty as is practiced in parts of America?
Okay, I'm glad that he gave you that question because that way I can save on an email. It was going to be a long email. He sent it to me also. Very interesting. Should a religious Jew support secular capital punishment? The initial answer that we would say is yes, and the reason is because even a non-Jewish society is governed by the 7 laws of Noach. And among the 7 laws of Noach are a prohibition against murder. And the Torah says, or the halacha says, that violations of the Noachide law are capital crimes. So, in fact, according to this, I should even support capital punishment for theft, which nobody is proposing outside of the Arab thing and the like. And even if you're going to tell them, but wait a second here, doesn't the halacha require that people be warned? Doesn't it require there be 2 kosher witnesses? The answer is not under the Noachide laws. The halacha of Hasra, and the halacha of 2 Edom, and the halacha, they have to be Shomer Shabbos, etc., only applies when a Jewish court is imposing capital punishment. It does not apply when a non-Jewish court is acting under the Noachide laws. A Ben Noach can be killed with 1 aid. A Ben Noach can be killed without a kosher base, obviously, because the court is non-Jewish. So the first instinctive reaction, therefore, is that any capital punishment for something that would be chayev misa under the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, I should support because they're carrying out halacha. And even if they're not carrying out on everything, for example, they don't impose the death penalty for adultery, but if they want to do it for murder, gesund to hate, because that is consistent with the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach. That would be the pashtus. In other words, not only would it be something that would be allowed, but one might even consider it a mitzvah under the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach to impose the death penalty. That would be the pashtus. It's a little more complicated, though. Some of you might have heard of Rav Aaron Soloveitchik. He was the brother of Rav Yosef Soloveitchik of Yeshiva University, and Rav Aaron Soloveitchik himself was a very, very chashuv person, a gadol b'Torah. He lived in Chicago. In fact, I was zocheh to, I wouldn't say I knew him, but I was zocheh to see him and say good Shabbos to him, and the like. The one thing I do remember about Rav Aaron Soloveitchik, just to digress for a moment, is he had a Jewish neighbor who would water his lawn and clean his car every Shabbos. That's what he did Saturday. And Rav Soloveitchik every Saturday would say, Joe, I want to wish you a good Shabbos. He wished him, and Joe would say, good Shabbos, Rabbi. And it's kind of a model of how to relate to people with warmth and with friendship. And eventually, I don't know if he made him a Shomer Shabbos, but he would invite him over to his house sometimes. And that was making a Kiddush Hashem. Now, when the Illinois State Legislature in the 1970s was debating whether they should institute capital punishment, so Rav Soloveitchik either testified or sent in a written statement that as a religious Jew, he was opposed to capital punishment. Now, people asked him right away, what's going on here? Under the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, violations of the Dinei B'nai Noach are chayiv misa. So, if a society executes people because they committed murder, that is exactly what the halacha says a non-Jewish court should do under the Noachide law. So why should you be against capital punishment? That's a very good question. And yet he was an Adam Gadol Ma'od, and he was against capital punishment. So one of the things he said a few things. One of the things that he said was that he didn't feel that the system was entirely fair when it came to deciding who gets the death penalty, who doesn't get the death penalty. In fact, this is an old argument why some had maintained for many years that the capital punishment system was unconstitutional. This was a legal debate for many years, but part of it was that minorities, blacks, tended to get it disproportionately as compared to whites. And Rav Soloveitchik felt when you have a system that's kind of corrupt and unfair and discriminatory, then even under the Noachide law, it would not have the right to impose capital punishment in that selective, discriminatory manner. That was one point that he made. Now, you could argue with that. You could say, who says the system is corrupt? But okay, but that was his particular judgment. The other point he made is a much bigger chiddush. It's actually a chiddush in halacha. He said, when the halacha is that the non-Jewish Noachide, but they didn't, can impose capital punishment, it does not mean it's mandatory. Rather, the Torah is giving to secular societies the ability to impose any type of punishment they see fit, up to capital punishment, but not that capital punishment is mandatory. For example, people ask, most crimes have jail time. Now, people say, well, is jail time legitimate according to halacha, since there's no real prison concept in halacha, generally speaking? And Rav Soloveitchik said yes, because under the Noachide law, capital punishment is the maximum that a society could impose, but it's not necessarily the minimum. They could impose all sorts of punishments in between. And therefore, the halacha is not saying they should kill people. The halacha is saying, if necessary, they can kill people. But Rav Soloveitchik argued that a civilized society would normally not get involved in taking life unless it was a very extreme situation. So that's a very big chiddush, because the pashtus of the rule that dinei b'nei noach or chayiv misa is that the death penalty is mandatory. He said it was never mandatory, and it should actually not be imposed as a matter of morality and the like. So, in a sense, I'm just answering the question by saying there are two ways of looking at it, and these two ways are actually reflected in a debate in the Mishnah in Makos, which is not about non-Jewish society, it's about Jewish society, but it makes the same point as the two sides of capital punishment, in which Rabbi Akiva made the claim that if he would have been on the Sanhedrin, which decided capital punishment, nobody would ever get executed at all. He would always want to get the guy off. And the Gemara explains that even if there are, Eidim, that Reuben stuck the knife into Shimon's heart, maybe there was already a hole in Shimon's heart before the knife went in, and Shimon was going to die anyway. And then the Gemara says if it came to adultery, and the witnesses testified that Reuven had intimacy with somebody's wife, they would say, what did you see exactly? You see them under a cover? What does that mean? In other words, what he required them to see would be not shaykh to actually see. So Rabbi Akiva's argument was better than the American Civil Liberties Union. Get him off no matter what. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel said to Rabbi Akiva, with your attitude that the bad guys get off, you're increasing murders in Am Yisrael. Now, this is a debate, really, about capital punishment that is still very alive today. Rabbi Akiva says the risk of making a mistake when it comes to capital punishment is so serious that we have to look for every possible way not to impose it. Because even if that means a lot of guilty people are going to get off the hook, but better that many guilty people get off the hook than one innocent person suffer an irreversible, irrevocable punishment. And if you believe in God, nobody ever gets off the hook, because if guilty people get off the hook, Hashem is going to take care of it. That's Rabbi Akiva's position. And those who are against capital punishment make the same argument today. That, hey, you don't know if you're right. There are people who are in jail for 50 years and we discover they're innocent. Well, what if you discover they're innocent after they were electrocuted or whatever it would be, right? So that would be against capital punishment. But what is Rabbi Shimon Gamliel's argument? If you're not going to impose the ultimate punishment, there are going to be bad guys who will not be afraid to commit horrendous crimes. So you want to save the occasional innocent guy at the expense of putting many victims at risk. So that machlokas about Dinei Yisrael will also have a relevance to Dinei B'nai Noach, between the advocates of capital punishment and those who are against capital punishment. Right? The issue of risk of error, that you might execute an innocent person, versus having to create the maximum deterrent against crime. So I think there is a strong case that you could support capital punishment, but there's also a case that we would be against capital punishment. That's really Rav Soloveitchik's point. Now, the one question you may ask me is, well, wait a second. The Torah itself, besides Dinei B'nai Noach, the Torah itself imposes capital punishment for many offenses. But once again, the Maharal already points out that the procedures to impose capital punishment, you have to have eyewitnesses, they have to give warning, he has to acknowledge the warning. It makes it almost impossible to impose. That's why the Mishnah says a Sanhedrin that killed somebody once every 7 years or once every 70 years was called a bloody Sanhedrin. Which means the purpose of capital punishment in the Torah is not that it is a punishment that we actually give. It's kind of on the books, so pedagogically we understand how severe an Aveira is. It has an educational function that's not necessarily meant to be applied in practice. You see the point? By saying that a given action, Chilul Shabbos, let's say, is Chiyav Misa, that doesn't mean that a Beis will go around executing people for Chilul Shabbos. Most of the time they will not, because of the requirements of warning and everything else. But by knowing that Chilul Shabbos is deserving of death, that teaches us how severe Chilul Shabbos is. So the Torah is not necessarily endorsing the death penalty even for the Sanhedrin, simply because you have so much capital punishment. By the way, I had mentioned that Judaism does not really have prison as a part of its normal system. I just want to qualify it because I know there's somebody out there who's going to call my attention to the Rambam in Hilchos Ritzicha. The Rambam does mention that at a time of a breakdown of law and order, where you kind of need martial law, and we don't have all the evidence that could convict murderers, but we're pretty sure they did it, there is a provision for setting up prisons where essentially people die of starvation or whatever it would be. But those are what are called extraordinary punishments in times of social breakdown, like war or rioting or the like. They are not part of the normal system. Prison is not part of the normal system. The closest thing we have to prison is the Ir Miklat, the city of refuge for the person who kills B'shogeg. But that's not really a prison. He's confined to a city, but within that city he can live a regular life. He can have a job and all sorts of other things. But we don't have prison per se.
Is there a makor in the Torah that we have to keep Minhagim? In other words, if I don't wait the prescribed amount of time between chicken and my milk chocolate bar, how much trouble am I in?
Yeah, so the question becomes, is there any direct source in the Torah that you're obligated to keep Minhagim, which were not mandatory, but they became common practices, such as waiting 6 hours for most Ashkenazim between meat and milk. It's a minhag, etc. So the Gemara itself does cite a pasuk in Parshas Hazinu towards the very end of the Torah, where Hashem says, Sha'al avicha v'yagedcha, ask your father and he shall tell you. Zekeinecha, ask your grandparents, v'yamru lach. Now, in truth, that's not talking about minhagim, that's talking about remembering the history of Hashem, helping Am Yisrael, saving Am Yisrael, that we have to remember those historical events. And yet the Gemara does seem to have a drasha that God is telling you, follow the practices that have been handed down from your forefathers, which is treated as a source of minhag. Now, there is another idea, too, which is very interesting, and it needs a lot of fleshing out, and that is that when a community has adopted a certain practice, that is treated like a vow, a neder. Now, the Torah does require we listen to our vows, but normally we would not assume that a vow is intergenerational. If my father made a vow, that's not necessarily going to bind me. But on the level of community, there's a concept. When a community makes a vow, it binds the community, which includes the future components. The analogy would be the human body. You know, virtually every cell in you today was not there 10 years ago. So let's imagine you made a contract 10 years ago. Now you want to break it. Person says, hey, you're breaking your contract. I say, no, I was a different person then, because every cell is different. There's not a single cell in my body that made that contract. So how do you answer that argument? You answer the argument by saying, well, the cells change, but it's a continuity of the person. Now, the same way we look at it that way with respect to an individual, we look at communities that way as well. In fact, Matan Torah works kind of the same way. Right? This week we have Matan Torah. So the Jewish people have to keep the Torah because they accepted the Torah. They bound themselves to keep the Torah. What do you mean? Why do I have to keep? I didn't bind myself. All right, so Kabbalistically we say I was there, but Lefi Pshuto. This was a commitment that my ancestors made. How does that bind me? For that matter, lahavdil, take the Constitution of the United States. Why is anything binding? It wasn't me. I didn't agree to it. So there is a concept both in Judaism and even in law and philosophy generally that communities are considered to be entities. And therefore communities make decisions that bind their community. So in that sense, one could subsume minhagim under the parsha of neder. And even though I as an individual never made such a commitment, but the community of which I am a part made that commitment, and therefore that's going to bind me. So b'kitzur, there might be two sources for minhagim. One would be the drasha and the pasuk, Sha'al avicha v'yagedcha, and the other would be the parsha of Nedarim as applied to an intergenerational community context. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
So something a little less severe than that, a gezerah on a minhag, like instead of meat and milk, chicken and milk. If I don't wait 6 hours between chicken and milk, I mean, that would seem less severe than meat and milk, and it's a gezerah on a minhag. So what's any? It's something I personally struggle with, you know. So I want to know what I can tell God when I do it. He never really said.
Well. I mean, let's first of all, I mean, keep in mind that the Oraisa, not only don't you have to wait 6 hours between meat and milk, but chicken and milk could be eaten. You can have, cheese melted on chicken. The whole din of basar oif is only a gezerah midrabanan. So let's put it this way. So if I eat meat that was cooked with milk, that's a doraisa. Meat that was cooked with milk. If I eat milk and I eat meat and I have to wait X number of hours, that would be midrabanan. The exact number of hours would be minhag. If I cook chicken and milk, that is an isur midrabanan. And therefore, the waiting period would be a minhag that is imposed on an isur drabanan, right? That would be the hierarchy. But once again, once you understand that minhagim can work as nedarim, then you can make a neder on a drabanan as well as a deraisa. In other words, all nedarim would have the same status. So, in a sense, that would not make a difference. Therefore, yeah.
So, I was reading the Gemara that mentions why does the Torah say in the pasuk when it's talking about when the brothers threw Yosef into the pit and the pit was empty and there was no water in it.
Yeah.
I was reading the Gemara that explains that the and there was no water in it points out the fact that but there was snakes and scorpions in it, and so my thought was. Could it be that the reason that the Torah here and in other places words the idea in such a strange way because it's getting, let's say, Rebbe's teaching a student and then it's worded in such a strange way to get the student to ask the question, hey, why is it worded that way? And then to remind the Rebbe to explain, actually because there was snakes in it.
Yeah, you're asking really part of a much, much larger question, and that is we believe that there's the Torah shebichsav, there is the written text that God dictated to Moshe to write down, and then there's oral interpretations of the text, much of which was also given to Moshe to hand down, and certain things are in the text, and certain things are the oral interpretation of the text. Why did Hashem decide that certain things are in there, and certain things are externalized interpretations of what is in there, but it's not in there? So you're giving one example in the Agadic realm where the Torah simply says the pit was empty without water. Now, it doesn't say there were snakes. I mean, I could read that sentence. I wouldn't see from the sentence itself that there are no snakes. I'm sorry, that there are snakes. But by virtue of the extra phrase, right, that the pit was empty, had no water, why is there a need to say no water? If it was totally empty, the answer is it was empty of water, but it had something else, and that was snakes. So that would be part of the Torah Shebal Peh. And the question is, we believe it's true. That's not the question. We do believe it's true. But the question is, if it is true, why didn't the Torah simply say it explicitly instead of leaving it for interpretation and leaving it for inference? So this is a huge question. I'll give you another example in a halachic context. An eye for an eye. The Torah says an eye for an eye. I knock out somebody's eye, then I should give up my eye. Now, this is called the lex talionis. Now, it's very well known, of course, that Chazal had a Messiah that an eye for an eye does not mean you knock out somebody's eye, but it means you have to pay the value of an eye, whatever that means. How much would a person be sold? I mean, the way you value it is, if you were sold as a slave, how much would you be sold if you have two eyes, and how much would you be sold for one eye? One-eyed slave would go for less, and therefore the diminution in value represents the value of the eye. Now, the question becomes, we're not questioning the truth of this belief. We believe ayin tachas ayin means money. But the question becomes, if it does mean money, why doesn't the Torah say money? Why does it say ayin tachas ayin, and then I need the tradition, the Masorah of Torah Shebaal Peh? It's really kind of another aspect of your question. Part of it is indeed the Torah wanted to create a situation where I would ask questions, where I would notice things. It forces a person to be engaged with textual nuance. And the more I think about the Torah, the more I am connected to subtleties, then in a sense, the Torah connects me to HaKadosh Baruch Hu much more. Meaning, the Torah is not like a novel where you're simply sitting back and reading stories. The Torah wants you to notice things and be engaged, and therefore it's written in such a way that unless you are focused, and unless you're concentrating, and unless you're sensitive to subtleties and nuance, you will not notice the emes. So yeah, Torah Shebaal Peh is to make me think, get me engaged. So your point is a very good point.
Here's another send-in. Is it permitted to listen to a recording of Kol Isha or not?
Yeah, is it permitted to listen to a recording of Kol Isha? Kol Isha is a rabbinic prohibition to listen to the voice of a woman singing. Let me say right off the bat that there are two different halachos of Kol Isha that one has to keep in mind. One is located in Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim, in the laws of Shema, and the other is located in Even HaEzer in the laws about how we relate to women. The law of Shema is the following, that in the presence of a woman singing, I am not allowed to recite Kriya Shema, or daven, or say berachos, or verbalize. I could think Torah, or verbalize words of Torah. Now, I want to point out, that halacha is so chamor that even applies to your wife. If my wife is singing, I am not allowed to daven in the hearing my wife singing. Okay, there's no exceptions to that halacha. That halacha is absolutely chamor, that you cannot say what are called devarim shebekdusha in the presence of women singing. That creates actually huge problems. Can I sing zemiras with my wife? If you sing benching, can I bench with my wife? Even if it's just me and my wife, you have a problem of kol isha on that particular level. All right, so those who are makel say if you're singing with your wife, it's okay. Rabbi Yoshev actually recommends that if your wife likes to sing, you should not sing with her because zemiras are called devarim shebekdusha. You should let her be a soloist, and you're permitted to learn without verbalizing. You should learn silently and let your wife sing. Okay, but the minhag ha'olam is that we're mekel on zemiras. Now, there's another halacha of kol isha. It's a different halacha. Another halacha of kol isha, that I'm not allowed to listen to a woman singing even if I'm not learning Torah or saying brachos. Now, that law does not apply to my wife or to my daughter, and some say to my sister or my mother. That only applies to unrelated people. That's a different halacha, you see? Now, with respect to both of these halachas, there is a big machlokas haposkim. Does the issur of kol isha only apply to live performance, or does it apply to recording? Now, all I can tell you is that there are different opinions. There are some who are legamrei mekel on recordings of kol isha. There are some who are mekel on recordings only if there's no accompanying video. So they would differentiate between an audio recording and a YouTube thing. And then there's a third opinion that says that even audios are forbidden, but only if you know what the singer looks like. So some will matter all audios. I'm sorry, we're going to extremes. Some will matter anything that's not live, even if there's video. That's one extreme of kula. Others will only allow audio and not video. And a third will only allow audio if you don't know what the person looks like. The emes is, and yet a fourth group is machmer on everything. They say everything is going to be usher. So there are many, many different opinions. Now, I've heard it said, I can't say that it's true, maybe I shouldn't say it if I don't know that it's true, that there was a very, very popular Egyptian female vocalist from the 30s and 40s and the like, and Ravaja Yosef used to enjoy listening to her records. Those were the days of the old-fashioned records. And he had no idea what she looked like. He had never seen a picture of her, that he wouldn't look at a picture. So he held it was mutter for him, at least if he did not know what the woman looked like. So there are different opinions on it. There's not really a final maskana. As you might expect, most of the poskim in Eretz Yisrael, except for Rav Ovadia, are very machmer on it, but other people are makel. Now, this issue of kol isha, in other contexts of live performances, has certain controversies. Some of you might have been involved, maybe it helped people become frum, with NCSY. Now, NCSY is a great organization. I myself was involved with the NCSY for a number of years. They take largely public school kids and really makes them religious kids, great religious kids. And but of course, their big thing is co-ed. It is a co-ed group, and singing is the biggest thing they do. And the girls tend to sing even more than the boys. So you're full of kol isha like all the time, right? 24/7 at a Shabbaton, not 24/7, but 24 on the seventh day. You have all sorts of singing and the like. So the hechsher that NCSY operates with is that since a lot of people are singing, so you don't make out individual voices, and therefore kol isha does not apply when more than one person is singing. Now the yesod of that hechsher goes back a little bit to a very interesting gadol, the Sridei Eish, Rav Yechiel Yaakov Weinberg, who died in the 1960s. He's a very interesting gadol, kind of a very unusual gadol. He was from Poland, and he went to Slobodka. He was a very close talmid of the Alter of Slobodka. He was the Elder Bacher to Rav Aaron Kotler and Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky. He was a little older than them. So he was a great Talmid Chacham. But for various reasons, he wanted to pursue some secular learning in Berlin. And he went to German universities. Says the Alter Slobodka fasted, for whatever. And eventually the Sridei Eish became the rector, the dean, the Rosh Yeshiva of the Hildesheimer Seminary in Berlin, which was, you might call it like a very early version of YU, meaning a yeshiva that combined some secular studies with some Jewish studies, little controversial, and the like. And he spent some years in the Warsaw Ghetto, and then, Baruch Hashem, he survived the Holocaust, more or less broken, and he spent the remaining years of his life in Switzerland, kind of the middle of nowhere. I mean, there are a lot of from Jews in Switzerland, but he didn't really have a yeshiva, and he was so great that people were inviting him to be Rosh Yeshiva here and Rosh Yeshiva here, but he didn't want to go because he said he wouldn't fit anywhere. He said he was offered to teach at Bar Ilan University. He was offered to teach university, and he was offered to be Rosh Yeshiva. So he said, I'm too modern for the yeshiva world, and I'm too frum for the university world. So he actually had a lot of agmas nefesh because he felt nobody really accepted him, nobody really... but he was considered to be one of the Poskei Ador, and he wrote Shelos Utshuvos, which are called Sridei Eish. That literally means remnant from the fire. The Holocaust was the fire. This survived the fire. And there, he has a long tshuva that when he first came to Germany, and he was exposed to a German youth group, a Kirov group, similar to NCSY, but totally, and they did a lot of boy-girl stuff, singing. Coming from Poland and Lithuania, he couldn't believe it. To him, this was like treip. This was chazer. He had never heard of such a thing in his whole life. But then he realized how effective this was to be makarev these kids to Hashem. They were all coming from assimilated environments, reform environments, or even less than reform environments. And he developed the heter that at least when you're doing it l'shem shamayim for Kirov, you can be somech on Trei Koli, the multiple voices lo mishtami. So this is the hechsher of the Shvidei Eish, and this is what NCSY does. Now, this can be abused. For a while, I was a posek, or the rav, of a very modern co-ed Orthodox high school, and they wanted to perform Les Miserables, is that how you pronounce it? And they wanted to have a female vocalist with a male singer too, and that way they said, we're going to be so much on the Shvidei Eish to put on Broadway plays. Again, the Shvidei Eish was not talking about putting on a Broadway play with women singing. He was talking about something that was necessary for kiruv rechokim, and to kind of apply his hechsher across the board to all sorts of those situations was not right. Now, just to finish about the Shvidei Eish a little bit, and I read this story, I couldn't believe it, but Rav Weinbach, Zichrono Livracha, our founding Rosh Hashiva, said he was there and he could be made, it was true. When the Shvidei Eish was nifter in Switzerland, he was brought to Eretz Yisrael for Kavura. And they were going to bury him in the Sanhedria cemetery, right here. Sanhedria, next to Rav Meir Bar Ilan, some famous religious Zionist. Rav Meir Bar Ilan is the Nitziv's son, but he changed his name from Berlin to Bar Ilan. Famous Zionist, also Talmud Chacham. And as they were carrying his coffin into the Sanhedria cemetery, all of a sudden, his old chaverim from Slobodka, who were the Rosh Yeshiva of Hebron is the successor of Slobodka, they came and they said, we're taking the coffin to the Mount of Olives to bury him next to the altar of Slobodka, where he really belongs. The older. And they literally kidnapped the coffin in the middle of the cemetery, middle of the funeral, to take it to Har HaZeisim. And they said, in his lifetime, perhaps he was a little estranged, but he really belongs to the altar of Slobodka. That's where they put him. So that's quite an amazing thing, that there was a certain amount of conflict, a certain amount of tension, that he was living in two worlds. People who live in two worlds are often going to be uncomfortable. In fact, to digress, this was a famous letter somebody wrote to Rav Hutner, that they don't feel comfortable in their life because they're always torn between two worlds. They have a world of secular education and a world of Torah, and they don't know where they belong, and they feel uneasy and they feel anxious. So Rav Hutner said, if a person had a house with one room, and then he expanded his house to have two rooms, would he feel that he's living in two rooms, or would he feel he's living in a bigger house? He says he's living in a bigger house. He says, you don't live in two worlds, you live in a bigger world. You live in a bigger house. Your life can be enriched by all of the different experiences that you've had. And he told the Talmud not to be despondent that he's living in these different worlds. But that would be the short answer of Kol Isha. Yeah.
Sorry about that. My question is, Kabbalistically, is there an underlying inferior makeup of a mamzer? And also, why can mamzerim only create more mamzerim and not be able to break the chain?
Yeah, so the issue is there something inferior, spiritually inferior about a mamzer?
Yes.
Okay, so first let's be sure everyone knows the definition of a mamzer. The Torah says a mamzer cannot enter the congregation of God. People make a mistake. Sometimes people translate mamzer as illegitimate child. Absolutely incorrect. A child that is born out of wedlock, a man and a woman have sexual relations outside of marriage, the kid is not a mamzer. So just because he's illegitimate, he's a regular kosher Jew, and there are no restrictions. In order to be a mamzer, a child has to be born out of female adultery. That means, in other words, a Jewish woman married to a Jewish man, who then commits adultery with another Jewish man. A non-Jewish lover does not create mamzer. Right? Jewish man has relations with a married Jewish woman. The kid is a mamzer. Or, God forbid, in a rarer case, an incestuous relationship. A father with a daughter produces a mamzer. A brother with a sister produces a mamzer as well. So a mamzer comes from adultery or incest, and it has to be female adultery. If a married man has relations with a single woman, even though that's very, very improper, that is not mamzer. Okay. Now, a mamzer is a Jew. A mamzer is chayiv in mitzvahs. A mamzer can be counted for a minyan, right? He's not a pariah. But a mamzer does have one very, very significant distinction or prohibition. A mamzer cannot marry a regular Jewish person. A mamzer can only marry a mamzeret, or a mamzer could marry a convert. Either way, there is a male mamzer can marry a geiris, or a ger can marry a mamzer. But no matter who the mamzer marries, the kid is going to be a mamzer. So if a mamzer marries a geiris, the kid is a mamzer. If a ger marries a mamzer, the kid is a mamzer. And even though the Torah's language is, it shall be a mamzer until the 10th generation, Chazal understand that 10th generation is just a phrase for forever. It does not mean after 11 generations it's going to be prohibited. Mamzer potentially could be a huge problem in modern society, because if a woman was Jewishly married and she didn't receive a get, but she got a civil divorce, then in the eyes of halakha, she's still married. And if she's still married, any kid she has from a second husband, even if it's a legal marriage, secularly, might be a mamzer. This is actually an issue for many people who are Balei Tshuva. Because let's imagine that you're born from your mother's second marriage, but she never got a get from her first marriage. Now, if nobody was religious, nobody cared. But now that you become religious, you discover at 25 that you're born from a second marriage where mom never got a get from marriage number one. Chas v'shalom, am I a mamzer? Right? That's it. Now that you're from, that becomes a real important question. It wasn't important when you weren't from. It was important, but you didn't think about it. So here, again, I don't want to get into all the halachas. This is really a whole shir in its own. The normal approach that the poskim try to show is that mom's first marriage was not halachically valid because he didn't have kosher witnesses. It was conservative reform, and the only time you need a get to terminate a marriage is only if the marriage was valid. If the marriage was not valid, you don't need a get. If you don't need a get, then mom's second marriage is valid, or even if it's not valid too, even if the second one is not valid, that just makes it out of wedlock. And out of wedlock is not going to be a mamzer. So it's very, very important. This is based on a psaka of Moshe Feinstein, that marriages that are conducted under conservative or reform auspices and kal v'chomer civil marriages are not halachically valid whatsoever, and therefore a failure to get a get for that marriage will not be a mamzer. Okay, but if it was a frum kosher wedding, yeah, you're in trouble, right? Then you got mamzeris without a get. So the question is there something spiritually, well, the whole idea of mamzer is a very tough thing to grapple with. You know, if the Torah has a general idea that children do not suffer for the sins of the parents, well, mamzer is exactly the paradigmatic case of an innocent child who bears a very, very significant stigma and disability, not because of anything the child did, but only because of what the parents did, right? Where's the fairness there? But the truth of the matter is, obviously, we're not punishing the child, but actions have consequences. I mean, the same way, if a man with AIDS, HIV, had unprotected relations, it may go to the wife, it may go to the child, whatever it would be, because actions create negative consequences. So the mamzer is born with a spiritual disability, a spiritual deficit, a certain blemish. Can he compensate? Yes, he can compensate, but it may take more work. It may take more avoda. There's born with a handicap. The same way that some people might be born with a handicap of, no arm or one eye or whatever it is. This is a spiritual handicap. Now, we tend not to look at it that way because we don't look at the spiritual world as real as the physical world. The truth of the matter is, the spiritual world is more real than the physical world. And, we look at it as, God is just creating an arbitrary rule. Why can't, God have compassion? The answer is that which is created by sin has a blemish. But a mamzer can become a gadol b'Torah. In fact, the Gemara even has a comment, most mamzerim have very acute intelligence. They're very intelligent. I'm not sure what the svara for that would be. Maybe it's a gift or a compensation God is giving them to enable them to achieve greatness in Torah. But yeah, there is a spiritual setback that they're born with, which they have to work hard to compensate. But they are still Jews in good standing who count for a minyan, go to yeshiva, they learn Torah, and the like. Now, I had said there is no way to break the mamzer quandary, but there actually is one way that the Mishnah says in Maseches Kedushin. This is from Rabbi Tarfon, and that is, if a mamzer marries a non-Jewish maidservant, if he has a maidservant, which he's allowed to do, a regular Jew could not do it, but a mamzer could marry a shifcha. So the halacha is, the child that is born from a shifcha kanainis is an eved kanani. If I then free the eved kanani, he is like a convert who is totally immune from that past status. And at that point, he's not a mamzer anymore. So a mamzer naisei shifcha. Now that only works if a male mamzer marries a shifcha kanainis. If a female mamzeres marries an eved kanani, that's not going to work. The kid is still going to be a mamzer. But once you have a male mamzer, there is a way for the next generation to be okay. Now, there are some poskim that have said, this could work even today, amazingly enough. You can have a non-Jewish maidservant. How do you get a non-Jewish maidservant? So, this may sound a little bizarre. You go into a bar or whatever it is, you look for a non-Jewish woman, and again, you can't live with, even a mamzer cannot live with a non-Jewish woman, stam a guy, but this is talk about a pickup line. He says, would you agree to be my slave? Now, you have to explain what that means exactly. That actually means she goes to the mikveh, she accepts upon herself the halachos of shivcha kanainis, which actually means, in terms of mitzvos, an eved and a shivcha are chayiv and mitzvos like a woman. So a shivcha kanainis has all the obligations of a Jewish woman, but she's a shivcha. The mamzer then cohabits with the shivcha kanainis. Technically, they can't get married. They can be legally married, but they can't. Halachically, there's no marriage. But they're living out of wedlock under a legal marriage. The children are little avodim, little slaves. The father can then free the little slaves, and the little slaves have the halacha of converts who are no longer mamzerim. Again, halachically, this can actually work. Halachically, this can work even today. I've heard people try it. What happens is, though, you can imagine when the police get wind of a guy that kind of has a slave in his house, they intervene and they think it's much worse than it really is. So people who tried it have gotten in trouble. But halachically, that is a way to break it. Okay? Yeah.
There's sources that say that you should carry yourself like a son of the king, carry yourself like a prince, like an honorable person. There's also sources that say you should distance yourself as much as you can from physicality. Princes, however, live a very physical life. Even like Jewish royalty, Shlomo Melech, I wouldn't say he was like very attached to the physical, but he had a lot of money, horses, all that. Where do you find the middle ground between living like a prince and staying away from physicality?
Right. So the question would be, on one hand, it says every Jew is a ben melech. We are the son of a king. We are prince. We have to comport ourselves with dignity and respect. On the other hand, we have many, many sources, although Judaism does not encourage fasting and torture and deprivation, but absolutely we're encouraged not to be overly invested in physicality and to live a more simple life, which is not the way a king would normally live. It is a good question, and of course it does highlight the fact that Judaism is often dialectical in the sense that it embraces contradictions. But I think the short answer is, in terms of how you live your life with simplicity, and you live your life without being overly connected to the material world. But the idea of being a Ben Melech is primarily connected to the dignity, the way you comport yourself. You comport yourself in a dignified, refined, noble way. Now that also means there is a certain amount of material comfort that you should seek for that, meaning you shouldn't seek deliberately to live in a shack. You shouldn't seek to live in a dump because, Gashmias doesn't count. You should try to have a home that looks decent, that's clean, etc. So once again, though, the focus is not on the opulence of your life. The focus is on the dignity and refinement that you exhibit in your behavior. And that's the idea of being a Ben Melech. There was a great Rosh Hashiva in Eretz Yisrael who was just nifter a few months ago, Rav Baruch Mordechai Ezrachi. I don't know if you've heard of him. Maybe he might not be so well known to many people. But he was a great Rosh Hashiva. And his father-in-law Rav Meir Chadash was a Talmud of the Alter of Slobodka. In fact, Rav Ezrachi's wife wrote a tremendous biography of her father, Rav Meir Chadash. I think it's called the Mashgichim that ArtScroll published. And you can see that she herself was a very learned woman. And whatever it would be, primarily through his father-in-law, Rav Ezrachi totally absorbed the teachings of Slobodka, the sheet of the Alter of Slobodka. And the Alter of Slobodka, whose name was Rav Nosson Tzvi Finkel, was a Talmud of the Alter of Kelm and indirectly Yisrael Salanter, but he had a different approach to Musar. His approach to Musar focused not on shortcomings, but focused on your innate greatness. The idea of Slobodka was Gadlus ha'adam, to build a person up, that a person should see their greatness. Because the Alter of Slobodka felt that when I'm aware that I'm a Ben Melech, then I'm going to behave a certain way. Verkehrt, I don't have to be told I'm a bum. I'm an oisvorf. I'm a worthless person. If I'm constantly told I'm a worthless person, then I might as well be worthless. Right? So the whole Alter of Slobodka was building people up. And Reb Baruch Mordechai, as a Rosh Hashiva in this generation, was very, very meforsam for building people up in all sorts of ways. So he recounts, I think when he was a Bachar, he was once walking with one of the Rosh Hashivas of Hebron, and the Rosh Hashiva of Hebron says, "Why are you slouching?" You think, why are you slouching? Is that how a Ben Melech walks? A Ben Melech walks, in a noble way. So there is this idea that, you have to try to be a dignified person. Now, the truth is, there were other shitos which went the other way, Navardic, kind of, show yourself that you're a nobody, don't be ostentatious. But in Slobodka, there was an emphasis on elegant dress, elegant walking. There was a certain emphasis on chitzonius that some people are critical of, actually, but that was felt to be a component of the dignity you need in Avodas Hashem to realize your greatness. So this is the shaila of godless ha'adam versus shifless ha'adam. Yeah.
The Syrian community is known not to accept converts.
Yep.
So, kind of based on my last question, is if a boy or girl in the Syrian community wanted to marry a convert, could they do a Taras Nidara to get over this minhag of not?
Yeah, this is a very, very strange custom. But again, it's a custom that was adopted by Chashava people, so I don't want to denigrate it. That within the Syrian community, they do not allow converts to marry into the community. So if you're a Syrian young man and you want to marry a convert, and we're not talking about reform, we're talking about a bona fide Orthodox conversion done by the best Beis Din in the world. Huh?
That's Ashkenazi.
Yeah, that's Ashkenazi. They will not accept it. Now, the reason why that was so was simply because there was a fear of the slippery slope, that once you open the gates for conversions, then you'll have, as you often have in America, spurious conversions, fake conversions. So they kind of made a gezerah that we don't take converts in. Now, the truth of the matter is, halachically, this type of gezerah is very, very difficult to justify, because the Torah says in more than 30 places, do not embarrass the ger, do not humiliate the ger. Now, it's one thing to say, people sometimes say, oh, if you don't recognize Reformed conversions, you're shaming the ger. No, you're not. A Reformed conversion is not a conversion. So I'm not shaming anybody. I mean, I'm shaming a non-Jew. But if you have a valid conversion that you're not accepting, l'chayra, that seems to be shaming the ger. But whatever it is, they felt it was so important that they had to do this. Again, this is not ancient. I mean, this is less than 100 years old. This is not going back hundreds and hundreds of years, but it started in the last century. So the question becomes, if I am a Syrian religious boy, and it happens to be that I want to marry a Giyaris, I really have to leave my community. I cannot be part of the Syrian community. They will not accept me in the shul and the like. So once again, if I want to leave my community, I need hataras nadarim. I need to annul my vow. That's true for everything. If a Sephardi wants to become an Ashkenazi, they would be able to do it, but there has to be hataras nadarim. If an Ashkenazi wants to become a Sephardi, same thing. So this would be an example of how a person might have to leave the community. Now, how his family will deal with him, I just don't know. I don't know enough about the Syrian community. I mean, would his family look at this as an intermarriage? Is that how far it's taken? And they might cut off contact? Or no, as a family, they'll still be together. I don't know. I'd have to see the sociological data about that.
Sorry, just to follow up, and I'm sure the rabbi will get an email or two about.
I'm sure I will, yes.
But so if a Syrian boy can do hataras nadarim to marry a convert, how come I can't do hataras nadarim to not have to wait between my chicken and my chocolate bar?
Well, the problem is this. I mean, the problem is that you're gonna have to, meaning like this. If you want to change your affiliation, if you want to become Sephardi, or you want to become Yeki even, you might be able to do that with hataras nadarim. But you can't, it's not like a Chinese menu. You can't just say, I'm going to be Ashkenazi, but I want to get hataras nadarim for this particular practice. See, the difference is, you can opt out of being affiliated to a congregation, but you can't opt out of the individual minhagim of the congregation as long as you're part of that congregation.
So when the Rav said for the previous question that it's minhags are considered a neder, I always have to have a minhag.
That's
in
correct.
some sense. I always have to be somewhere
A Jew has to belong
to a community.
to a community. But you can choose your community and you can change your community, but in order to be released from the obligations of your old community, there would be an hataras nadarim.
Okay, and I'm really sorry. If I found a town where everyone agrees with me, they don't want to wait 6 hours between chicken and chocolate, are we allowed to?
So that's really a question. Can we create new communities today? That's an interesting question. I had mentioned earlier in the day that this was one of the Vilna Gaon's complaints against Hasidim, that Hasidim are Ashkenazim. Hasidim are not Sephardim. And yet the Hasidic movement decided at a very early time, primarily because of the Arizal, that they would adopt essentially a version of Nusach Sfarad. It's not the same as Edut HaMizrach, but essentially we'll call it Ashkenazic Sephardic. Right? What Hasidim daven is not the same thing as a Moroccan person davens, but it's based on Sfarad. The Vilna Gaon had a tremendous tightness. Is what gives you the right to break away from one Eidah to establish a new Eidah. So that would be the problem. The problem is, where's the cutoff point? Obviously, there was some point in Jewish history where these things could have been done and were done. The question is, at what point did things get fixed? So you got to work within the parameters of the existing Eidots, and you cannot create your own. So that's a hard question. Yeah.
It seems from the story with Shaul, when he met Shmuel for the first time, that it was accepted practice to give the Navi money or some form of gift. I'm not sure I have a question if it's true, but it seems incredibly strange when we ask her, per se, teaching Torah and Nadarim for money, however the halacha comes out, And even in Shmuel himself, we said his greatness was not so much that he took nothing, it was that he took nothing, meaning he didn't sleep in anybody's house, he didn't take anybody's food. But those things are much, but more, it sounds like, not so much.
Yeah. So let me explain something about this. The question is, when Shaul goes to Shmuel, to meet Shmuel, and he's looking for donkeys, etc. So the implication is you gotta pay for the service. You want to know where your keys are? Fork over some money, and I'll tell you. Is that what a Navi does? Is that what Tzaddik does? Everything has to be for a price. I mean, the other way around. Shmuel is later praised for not taking people's hospitality and the like. So the emphasis, let me start with a passage in Maseches Megillah. Maseches Megillah says, how many Nevi'im are mentioned in Nach? So it mentions 48 male Nevi'im, men, and 7 Nevi'ot, are in Kisvei HaKodesh, right? A total of 55 Nevi'im. Now, the Gemara then says there's actually a lot more than 55. There were at least 600,000 Nevi'im in Klal Yisrael over history, and some say double that. Kiflayim, Ki Yotzei Mitzrayim, 1,200,000 prophets. So the Gemara asks, if there's 1,200,000 prophets, why does Tanakh only record 55 Nevi'im? The answer is because the prophecies that are recorded are prophecies of eternal value, meaning when I read a parak of Yeshayahu, it applies to me today, even if it goes over history, but there's a message today. But all of these other Nevi'im did not have an eternal message. So here's the question. If they didn't have an eternal message, what exactly was their function? What was the purpose of that 1,200,000 prophets? The answer was that prophecy at one time was simply a gift that God gave people to help you find your keys, to help you find your donkeys, meaning there were two different types of prophets. There were prophets that God chose to give a message to Bnei Yisrael, and then there were prophets that lahavdil were somewhat like psychics. But again, I don't want to compare the two. These were genuine prophets, but they didn't necessarily have any prophetic mission. They were just given a special divine gift to help people. Now, Shaul did not know that Shmuel was of the nature of the prophet chosen by God to give messages. He thought Shmuel was the run-of-the-mill prophet who made a living by using his gift to help people. In other words, it was also a form of, as strange as it sounds, it was a form of parnasa. So when you find that Nevi'im were given money or given some gift, it does not refer to the Nevi'im that had a mission from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It refers to the Nevi'im that were not necessarily ledorot, but they were given this talent. And like any talent, a person has a talent, I can charge money for it. Right? Now you're right, the Gemara discusses the halachic permissibility of charging for Torah teaching. And in fact, we have to work out a lot of heterim, right? Baruch Hashem, over the years, the Rabbanim have worked out heterim to get paid. According to one opinion in the Gemara, the heter of getting paid for Talmud Torah is the babysitting services that are being provided, right? I'm keeping you guys away from Ben Yehuda Street, whatever it be. Of course, the Gemara is talking about little kids, but whatever it is. According to another opinion, if I'm teaching Chumash, I can charge for the trup. Although when we teach Chumash, we're not doing trup, but okay. And the like. The Gemara has to come up with peripheral things. Lamaskana, the heter to charge, is sechar batala. Sechar batala means I'm not getting paid for the Torah I'm teaching. I'm getting paid for foregoing alternative employment that we could have had. So you are correct, there are restrictions, but that applies to Torah. If as a Navi I tell you where your car keys are or your donkeys are, that's not nichlal in Talmud Torah, and for that I would be allowed to charge. God gave me a gift, God gave me a talent. I'm allowed to charge. One other thing about Nevuah though, the Gra says, however, that even the Nevi'im that you might call run-of-the-mill, and of course we shouldn't talk that way because every Navi must have been a great, great tzaddik to be zeicha for Nevuah, they were not, even though they didn't have an eternal message, they were not just, where are my keys type of thing. The Gra said, if a person wanted to know his mission in life, why am I here? What is the goal of my life? When there was a Navi, you could go to a Navi, and a Navi would tell you. And imagine, I mean, what a gift that is. A Navi could tell you what you are supposed to do with your life. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to do it. That's bechira. A person could ignore, you can ignore a Navi's words like you ignore anyone else's words. Or put it another way, if we ignore the Torah's words, we can ignore a Navi's words. I mean, Hashem tells you what to do with your life too, on a certain level, and we ignore that. So the fact that a Navi tells me is not going to necessarily be stronger, but a Navi could give you, specific direction. Should I stay in yeshiva another year? Or should I go to college? You had somebody to ask. I mean, now you have lots of people to ask, but, we speculate, we guess, we don't have the clarity of Nevuah. But a Navi could really give you an answer. That's a tremendous gift. And the Torah itself says that he gave Nevuah to the Jewish people as a gift to give them access to divine wisdom in all generations, even after Moshe. Litzarenu, Nevuah stopped at the very beginning of the Bayit Sheni. Essentially, it stopped at the Bayit Rishon. It a little bit lingered till the very beginning of the Bayit Sheni with Chagai, Zechariah, Malachi. When they died, Nevuah stopped in Klal Yisrael. And the Rambam writes in Hilchos Malachim that shortly before Mashiach comes, Nevuah is going to be restored. Okay, so Nevuah will actually be restored before Mashiach comes. That's what the Rambam says. Yeah.
Here's another send-in. We learned recently how chazir is related to choser, to return. How is bakar, cow, related to boker, morning?
Wow, interesting. Chazir, pig, is a lashon of chazor, to come back, and the Gemara has a drasha that the pig will eventually be restored to the roster of kosher animals. And what exactly that means, people debate. Some have suggested, again, I don't need to get mail on this, I know the controversy, that the babarusa, some say, is a pig that chews its cud. Right? Pigs anyway have split hoofs. And some say the babarusa is a kosher pig, etc. But again, please don't write me that the babarusa is not a pig. I'm aware of the biological research on that particular issue. But whatever it means, the Gemara has a drasha that liyosid lavai, it will come back and be classified as a kosher animal. So the question is, once we are darshaning the names to refer to other things, then bakor, right? Bakor, which is cattle, is that connected to boker, which is morning, right? Why would cattle be connected to morning? Well, could say, you get your milk from a cow, so cereal and milk every morning, I don't know. It's a good question. I'd have to check. Just to give people a source for these things, if you're interested in etymologies, you're interested in how is this word connected to this word, I'll give you two sources. I'll give you three sources to look at. One classical source is a commentary on Chumash, Haksav v'Hakabbalah. This is a fascinating Parish written by Rav Yaakov Tzvi Mecklenburg, who was a Talmud of Rebbe Akiva Eiger. It's a fascinating parish. It's not used that much, but it goes into amazing etymologies. It shows how different words in Hebrew are connected to each other. There's like partial translations in English, not complete translations in English. A second source is Rav Shimshon of Al Hirsch's Parish on the Torah, which of course is available, written in German, but is available in English. And somebody compiled, I think it may be out of print, but you can still see it around, based on all of Rav Hirsch's writings, an etymological dictionary of the Hebrew language. So you can, okay, you got it right there. That's exactly right. So I bet you, I don't know if we'll do it now, it's a dictionary. Look up the word bakar. Right? Look up the word bakar and see if Rav Hirsch has any comment. I have no idea if he does, but that's a really good place to look. Wow, it's almost like a plant in the audience here. Is this you have Bakar there? You see?
Lots of props today.
Distinguish differences. Examine, strive to know.
Yes, Bakar, right, examine.
Mourning, time of distinguishing.
Yes.
Independent animal. Also
Independent, what is it about animal? What did it say?
Independent animal. And also herdsman, later on.
Okay, I'm going to have to think about that,
Yeah.
what the connection between those different definitions are. It is true that Bakar is connected, levaker is to examine. So we have the Ksava Kabbalah, which is hard to use, but that's very, very complete. We have Rav Hirsch, we have the etymological dictionary based on Rav Hirsch, and then we have one of our teachers in our Sameach, Rav Reuven Chaim Klein. You may know him. He's kind of an expert in synonyms and the Hebrew language. He writes a column for Ornet, and he also wrote a few books on Hebrew. So he would be someone to consult on it. So I'll see if I can find out more. But off the top of my head, I don't have a definite answer on that. Yeah.
The one thing is that it says independent animal. So if we say the cow is the kind of animal whose tendency is to go search out, and then we combine that with striving to know, which is like the sun. When it's light, that's the time in which things are revealed. And so there's an opportunity to go out. So there's like a tie between the nature of a kind of animal that wants to explore and the time of exploration in which you can do so.
Yeah, so that's connect. So I say that's connecting boker and livaker, because obviously the daytime is when you can examine things, you can tell the differences between things. Would I use a cow, though, as the prototype of the wandering, curious animal? I'm not sure. I think of a cow as it kind of stays put a little bit. But maybe a goat. A goat is more of a wanderer than a cow. Yeah.
I was reading Rabbi Joshua Berman's book, and he tries promulgating.
Which book?
This new one. What's it called?
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, tell me your question. I'll probably figure out the book from the question.
I was reading his book, and he tries promulgating the idea that the number 600,000 Jews is not actually 600,000. It's sort of just expression. So I'm wondering, why is he allowed to say that the Torah is not completely accurate if there's no Maimar Chazal that says that that's not true?
Yeah. So again, I do not know Rabbi Dr. Berman. Let me just give you a little background where he's coming from. He really entered a no man's land. He really entered a tremendously dangerous territory. And that is, he's a rabbi, but he's also a professor at Bar Ilan. And the field that he chose to enter is by far the most dangerous of the Jewish studies fields, and that is Bible, Tanakh. Typically, if you were interested in pursuing Jewish studies at a university, and you had a frum professor, the frum professor would say, okay, why don't you do Jewish history of the rabbinic period or the Rishonim? Why don't you write your dissertation on Rabbeinu Gershom? I mean, those are safe things. I look at the tshuvos, and I write about Rabbeinu Gershom. I write about Rashi. I write about Tosfos. You can do good academic historical research, and you'll be learning Torah at the same time. You go through what is Tosfos' approach to secular law. That's a good topic, right? And I'm doing a lot of learning. But the one thing you got to avoid at all costs is do not study Bible. Because when you study Bible, the whole field of Bible studies is based on multiple authorships. They divide the Chumash into P, J, different codes, the documentary hypothesis. And it's predicated on Torah is not from Hashem. So you can't be religious, you can't be frum and get engaged in this particular field. By definition, you're going to be involved in kfira and the like. So it's been a fixed rule that from people who want to pursue an academic career in a Jewish field, stayed away from Tanakh. There are very, very few exceptions. Rabbi Berman is one of those exceptions. His field is Tanakh. Now, by definition, therefore, he is confronting a field that is almost 100% kfira, 100% apikorsis, ideas that are totally against our Messiah, what he has tried to do is he has tried to defend the Messiah against all of the attacks within the context of biblical scholarship. So you have to appreciate what he's doing. He's doing something that many people feel is absolutely impossible.
He's basically alone.
Well, I can count it on less than one hand. Yeah, he's basically kind of alone. So what he's doing is really a monumental accomplishment. But the point is this. Obviously, he's going to squeeze every type of interpretation that he can, because if you simply go with the normal interpretation of the Torah that we learn in yeshiva, that's not going to survive in this world of scholarship. So he's trying to make the Torah min hashamayim palatable within a context of kfira and apikorsis. So as a result, he will often take approaches that, well, this isn't exactly literal and this isn't exactly literal, etc. Numbers. Now, the truth of the matter is, if you check his footnotes, and you got to look at his footnotes, you will see that usually he'll have makoros upon which he's building. Meaning there are Rishonim that say at various points in the Torah that numbers were rounded off, etc. Now, of course, numbers rounding off is not the same. In other words, if you notice, when we have a breakdown of the population, you will notice that everything is like in whole units of 10 or hundreds, which is kind of unlikely. Why wouldn't there be a tribe that has, 20,007 members? You never find that. So the Rishonim already say that the Torah uses rounded off numbers. There are makairos for that. That not every number in the Torah is intended to be exact. There is a certain rounding up or rounding down. That you can actually have sources for. So he's extrapolating and saying, numbers are lav dafka. Now, this is a very dangerous, I agree with you, this is a very dangerous methodology that's done all the time in the academic world. A Rishon makes a relatively minor point, that something is an approximation, and then you turn it into a major point. Oh, Yetzias Mitzrayim didn't really happen, it's only a mashal, right? So that's the danger. That is the danger of trying to live. We talked about living in two worlds before. Living in two worlds. Living in the world of academic biblical criticism and living in the world of Masorah. Very, very uncomfortable. The worlds are so incompatible that almost by definition, you wind up compromising in one direction or the other. But I'd have to look. I'm aware of the book you're talking about, but I have not seen the book. All I can tell you is that his motivation is a very noble motivation. It's an attempt to uphold the Messiah against all of the arguments of biblical critics. And, that is something that maybe somebody has to do, but very, very few people attempt it. And it's a very dangerous type of thing. Yeah.
There's a restaurant in my neighborhood that is Todah Kosher, and it's right next to their pride flag. So I'm wondering if a store that's open on Shabbat, they can't get a hechsher, how come something that is as stringent as these types of relations can get a hechsher? And I've called the rabbi at the Todah, not to make trouble, just ask.
Yeah, what did they say? What did they say?
He said, look, he goes, I can't say anything about the flag, but I can
Yeah.
tell you that everything that's purchased there is kosher, and I've checked it.
So this is a very interesting question. To what degree should hashgachos go beyond issues of kashrus? I mean, let's imagine you have a restaurant that's kosher, and they have mixed dancing, or things that are even worse, nightclubs, but glatt kosher. Now, let's assume that I have a hashgacha, or I'm the supervising Rav HaMachshir, and I make sure that every bit of food that goes in there is 100% kosher. So here's the question. Should my attitude be, if they're doing immoral things here, then I should not put my seal of approval on this establishment, because I become complicit, I become endorsing, right? And that would apply, let's say, if it supports gay pride or whatever it is. Or should my attitude be, listen, I certify kashrus. I don't certify lifestyle. And lifestyle is lifestyle, and that's none of my business. I mean, maybe it's my business as a Jew, but it's not my business as a mashgiach. So l'maisa, there's a big machlokus among hechsherim about this. Some hechsherim take the position of, my only business is kosher, and I'm still doing a service. So even if people are doing immoral things, at least they're not going to eat treif. So at least I'm helping them a little bit. Others say I cannot endorse an establishment that's involved in anti-Torah activities. Now I remember years ago, I don't know what the current policy is, but I know that the Eidach Haredis will not give hashgachos to establishments that have like men and women sitting together all the time, teenage hangouts, because they don't want to approve those types of establishments. I remember hearing too, I don't remember the whole story, this was years and years and years ago. For a long time, you couldn't get Pepsi in Israel. You can only get Coke. Not now Pepsi is available. And one of the stories, who knows, one of the stories was because Pepsi had a commercial which had a dinosaur in it. So they said, we can't give a hashgacha on a company that believes in dinosaurs, because that's they would not endorse it because they believed in dinosaurs, or they made, they acted as if they were dinosaurs. So that's an extreme example of a lifestyle or philosophical shita disqualifying. So if you're asking me on the merits of it, I can see both ways. I can certainly understand. I'm not going to endorse a place that espouses a hashgacha that is against the Torah. That's one point. The other point is, I'm still providing a service. I am providing a service that will help Jews not be nichshal, even if they're sinful for going into that place. At least I'm preventing them from the additional sin of eating non-kosher food. And therefore, if I could save them from chet, it is a good, positive thing to do.
From the consumer side, if
Yeah.
I can't eat at an establishment that's open on Shabbos, because if I'm worried that if they're not Shomer Shabbos, who knows what they're doing for the food, I might be worried if they're not Shomer.
I think there's a big difference. When a restaurant is open on Shabbos, that means there is food preparation going on that is not under the hashgacha of the mashgiach. That is a direct food concern. If you have a mashgiach tamidi, but the restaurant endorses gay rights, okay, but the mashgiach tamidi is ensuring that there's not a food problem, you see? Yeah.
Why don't they say what bracha is? Let's say a possible kosher, might see like the mashgichim. They don't, like the mashgichim are never there. They could tell the guy behind the counter, this bagel is mizanus, this thing is. Why don't they do at least that? I'm saying.
Yeah. So the truth of the matter is, I do see that a lot. I do see, well, at least on wrap things, it'll say the brachas mazonos or whatever.
They want people to buy it because they're trying to fund.
Yeah, but the truth of the matter is, to talk about Pasa Baba Kisnan would be a huge complicated matter, because in terms of what is the amount that you're koveya suda on, there are a gazillion different shitas, meaning it's almost impossible to say.
Cucumber salad, they could.
Yeah.
On simple stuff, they could do it. There's no machlokas on what an Israeli salad is.
So what should they say on an Israeli salad?
They should just write what the bracha is. On water, they should say hashgacha.
Oh, why don't they say what the bracha is?
Yeah, on a lot of simple stuff.
Well, I think the answer might be that those who make brachos know, and those who don't make brachos won't make it. And maybe in such a situation, better they should be a shogeg than they should be a mesit. I don't know. In other words, things that are simple, they know. Things that are complicated are complicated. It's hard to give a definite direction. Yeah.
Another sentence. I've heard from several rabbeim in the past saying that one should not say "Oh my God" even in English, because even there you somehow use his name in vain. Is there any truth to that statement?
So the question is, should a person just refer to God in a casual way? Is that called mentioning God's name in vain? The short answer is no, because the truth of the matter is the prohibition of God's name in vain does not apply to a name, b'lashon chol. If it's in another language, there actually is no isser of mentioning it in vain. So just like I say, Hashem should protect you, I can say God should protect you, and that's not called in vain. The problem with the expression OMG, as they sometimes abbreviate it, is that maybe that's too irreverent, meaning there's no isser in mentioning God's name, but you have to mention it in a respectful context. And OMG perhaps might not be respectful, but it absolutely is not the sin of mentioning Hashem's name in vain, because that does not apply to a shame, b'lashain chel. Yeah.
What would give the right to a company that's giving out kashrus, maybe I don't know if it's an Isidaris or something else, but besides for within that category, to play judge and juror on anything except for kashrus, unless they have a Sanhedrin of the Gedolei Yisrael. Unless you want to run by Jewish law, which in turn has a lot of checks and balances in and of itself. Without a prophet, we also did it. Unless you want to run that way, you can't really say that my bezdin of people who are made up of people who I like is a lot of...
Well, first of all, I agree with you that this type of shaila should actually be submitted to Gedolim. I think it's important that the Gedolim give us an opinion on it. But the other thing to keep in mind is that, hashgachas are a business. I'm not poskening for the world. I'm saying I don't want to give you a hashgacha. I don't have to give you a hashgacha. Even if you're kosher, I don't have to give you a hashgacha. I mean, a business decides who it wants to work with, who it doesn't want to work with. So if you're asking me, do they have the right? Does a hashgacha have the right? Now again, there may be a legal problem. If they granted the hashgacha, could they revoke it? That's actually a contractual problem. But if you're talking about initially, we don't grant hashgachas to certain types of places, you have the right to do that. You don't have to grant hashgachas.
Hashgachas have become such a worldwide item that we don't actually rely on the halachas of the Shulchan Aruch in his dinei hashgacha. Most people don't know it. Most people think you're doing isurim if you did it yourself. We made hashgacha so it's the only way to get kosher food in the Jewish world. In which case, now if you want to say that we made this and we made it a business, you monopolize something that's not halachically accurate.
Again, you're raising issues. I mean, but as I say, given the fact that because the ubiquity of hashgachos is people say that they are the ones who decide what I could do, where I could go, and where I can't go. So the argument would be that any certification is now an endorsement. In other words, it turns into an endorsement in that way. Again, I always like to give stories from Rav David Feinstein's biography. Just a story that they came to a place, a fundraising event, and a family was sponsoring it, and the family served food, and all of the Rosh Hashivas who were with Rav David didn't eat the food. Because we don't know. And Rav David was eating the food. And they asked Rav David afterwards, how do you know? How do you know? So Rav David said, Rav David said, well, the halacha is, Eid echad neman bisurin. One witness is believed to tell you the food is kosher. If somebody tells you the food is kosher, including the host of the house, or the hostess, you believe them. He says, I'm following the Shulchan Aruch. I don't need a hashgacha. Eid echad neman bisurin. And then Rav David said, if you want to know what is a halachic problem, is that how can you have bread? They didn't eat anything but the bread. He says, how can you eat bread before you daven Ma'ariv? That's a halacha. That's an actual halacha in the Shulchan Aruch. So it's a funny thing. We reverse things. People don't mind, eating bread before Ma'ariv, but they have to have a super duper duper hashgacha. I get this question all the time. Again, I don't want to be makel in hashgachas because I guess kashrus is, but people are constantly looking for the ugly underside of hashgachas. They'll take every hashgacha and they'll say, there's this problem, there's that problem. I was once in there and there was no mashgiach for 15 minutes, and who knows what could have happened. Okay, you look enough, you're going to find something. Somehow people's brains seem to have changed. When you're in America, and you go with OU and star K, you think those things don't happen? They do happen, but you don't ask. Here, everything becomes obsessive. Somebody said, a rabbi, a very chashuv rabbi, was asked about the Eidach Haredis, which is considered to be the gold standard hashgacha. He said, well, I would trust them for chewing gum. you know. So here's the thing. So you could take the position, I don't rely on any hashgacha. I got to shech the chicken myself. I got to, make the bread, whatever it is. Okay, you want to take that position, fine. But to expect hashgachos to be a fail-safe is just a world that never existed, and it just won't exist. So this idea of people poking holes into even the mahadran hashgachos, I think is kind of crazy. Okay, yeah.
Myself for David, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
I assume he was eating some form of meat or chicken, where halachically we said that you'd like to know the shaykhid himself, unless you want to say that he was saying he's in their house.
He was in their house, yeah. He was in their house, and he held Eidach and Bisurin. Now, but again, Rav David's answer is not so pashut because the problem basically is when people are operating with a different standard. So you tell me kosher, but I don't know what you mean by kosher. You see, in other words, like this, if you were to tell me that you bought chicken under OU hashgacha, so I would halachically be entitled to believe you. But if you just told me the chicken is kosher, in a way it's a little difficult to say, yeah, I believe you. I believe you that you believe the chicken is kosher, but what definition of kosher are you working with? Without the definition, it's very, very hard. But I'm assuming the assumption was that in different neighborhoods, there's only like one type of chicken that's available, meaning if you're in Queens, it's that. So it's either treif or it's this. In such a situation, you tell me it's this, so I ate echad neman b'isurin. Yeah.
I think it's Noam and Hilchot Malachim. At the end of Hilchot Malachim, he mentions how, when in regard to like what the details are going to happen of Latzit Lobo, the Rambam says that we don't have a clear Masorah on what's going to happen and the details of how it's going to come about coming. And he says that even Chacham didn't exactly have conclusive ideas of what's going to happen. And he's like, he's going to be spending too much time on it because, because we don't have a clear Masorah on it. But it's just very interesting because how the Rambam himself and many other Rishonim have machlokim about like what the details are of how like Latzit Lobo and Tichat Meitim and things of that sort. And even let's say the Ramchal, like Mar Gula, it's difficult to see where exactly all these concepts you're mentioning from, like where they're sourced in, because Chazal don't necessarily have exact. At least it doesn't seem to me. I could be wrong, but they don't have exact clear definition of how these are all going to play about.
Yeah. So just to repeat the question or paraphrase the question, the Rambam says in Hilchos Malachim that before Mashiach comes, there'll be certain cataclysmic events that are described as the wars of Gog and Magog, and different things are going to happen, but we don't know what those events are. We have no way of identifying them. We don't know which nations are involved. We don't know how long it's going to take. We don't know the sequencing. And the Rambam says we should not even bother to spend time trying to figure this out. Like people are always correlating, particularly in Eretz Yisrael, they're always correlating current events with messianic prophecies. The Rambam says beferish that we should not be involved in that endeavor because we just don't know. We will only understand the messianic process in hindsight, meaning once Mashiach comes, I can go backwards and say, this was that, and this was that, and this was that. But as it's happening, you have no idea what it represents. And the Rambam even says these things are a waste of time because they do not bring a person to Yiras Hashem and Avas Hashem. One should believe in Mashiach and then understand we have no idea how and when he's going to be coming. Now you then say that there are Rishonim and Acharonim that do spend time trying to explain the Mahalech of Geula. We have the Ramban to some degree in Shar HaGemul, which is his famous sefer on Schar V'Einesh. We have the Gra and the Ramchal. The Ramchal wrote a sefer on Geula. In fact, there's a very excellent sefer that came out a few years ago. It's called Acharis Kereishis. It shows how the future redemption is going to parallel the exodus from Egypt. And it's a comparative study of the Gra and the Ramchal on the Seder of Geula. Acharis, Kurashis, the Vilna Gaon, and the Ramchal. But if you're asking me, so where are their Makoros? And the answer is they do have Makoros. The Makoros are largely, well, there are Chazals, and there are many passages in the Zohar. The Zohar especially has quite a lot. So you'll find among the Mekubalim that they were shayev from the Zohar, many ideas about Geula, and these were amplified by the Arizal and Rav Chaim Vital and the like. So in a way, it kind of makes sense that the Rambam that was not connected to Kabbalistic Makoros would say we don't have a Messiah. The Mekubalim had their Messiahs based on the Zohar. Yeah.
We know that there's, the Torah recognizes certain marriages as, even though they're usher, they're valid. So let's say kind to somebody that's
To a Grusha, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So how is it possible? And we also know you need kosher aiding for any type of kedushin. So how do those two things work within each other? Meaning, on one hand, how do you have two people that we should consider as tzaddikim, validating something that's usher minhag?
Yeah, so this is an excellent question. Let's take the simple example of a Kohen who marries a divorced woman, right? So that's an Isser D'Oraisa for a Kohen to marry a divorced woman. If a Kohen went ahead and married a divorced woman, the Kedushin is prohibited. They're not allowed to stay married. They have to get divorced, but it is a valid marriage that needs a get. Because the only type of marriage that's invalid, that doesn't need a get, is an Avera that you're chayiv kares for. Like your Makadesh, your sister, or whatever it would be. But chayve lavin, a negative commandment, Kedushin is chal, except according to Rabbi Akiva, but we pass in chayve lavin, Kedushin is taifsim. So your question is, well, wait a second here. The Kedushin is only valid if you have kosher witnesses. And if you have kosher witnesses, that means, among other things, they must be observant of the Torah. So if I'm a witness and I know that you, the Kohen, are committing a sin, doesn't that... Well, I'm not sure if you're asking halachically or just factually. In other words, number one, factually, if I'm from, how could I agree to be a witness? Or maybe the question is even more perplexing. If I am a witness to a prohibited marriage, does that render me a sinner? Which means it's no marriage by definition. So I'm not sure which way you're asking the question, or both ways. One is a factual issue and the other is halachically. So the short answer would be, the simple answer, but I don't think it's a complete answer, is that, the witnesses don't have to know that he's a Kohen, and they don't have to know that she's divorced. In other words, Ruvain wants to marry Rachel. And Ruvain asks me, I'm his good friends, but I don't know he's a Kohen. Be my witness, watch this marriage. So I'm a witness to a marriage. I didn't know it was prohibited. Right? That would be a simple answer. But if that's the case, that would be a big chiddush. In other words, the chiddush would be that if the Eidim know that the wedding is prohibited, it wouldn't be a valid wedding because you don't have Eidim. That would be the chiddush in what I'm saying. L'maaseh, it reminds me a little bit of a psak of Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, which may be very relevant to this. This was an infamous case that happened, maybe 20 years ago, about a man that was in a bitter fight with his ex-wife over a divorce. And for some crazy reason, I'm not sure what the revenge dynamics were, what he did was, a father can marry off his daughter until she's 12 and a half. So he was Makabel Kedushin. He arranged for somebody. He was Makabel Kedushin to marry off his daughter, but he wouldn't say who the man was. He wouldn't say who the man was until his wife agreed to something or whatever it would be. Now, this was really a horrendous thing. You're talking about a 12-year-old girl who can never get married unless this is clarified. Let's imagine, the father had a heart attack the next day. She could be an aguna the rest of her life that way. So Gedalim were consulted, and I think Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, actually, one of the mahalchim was that anybody who agreed to be witnesses to this kedushin were Rishonim. And because they're Rishonim, the kedushin could not be chal. Because since it's very clear this was done out of spite, then by definition you're a Russia for being mishtatif. So I'm wondering if that would be an analogy to your particular case. That if the Adam knew that he was a Kohen marrying a Grusha, Ein Chinami, maybe the Kedushin would be puzzle, but the validity of the Kedushin is when the Adam don't know. But I have to be mine. I'll try to check into that. Yeah.
Rashi in Sukkah says that the Beis Hamikdash is going to come from Shemayim and just land on the Temple Mount. So I'm wondering, why are there people now, groups of people nowadays, building the Kalim of the Beis Hamikdash?
Yeah. So this is the famous statement of Rashi that the Bayis Hashlishi is going to be Yored Min HaShemayim. Let me just point out that the Rambam himself absolutely argues with Rashi, because the Rambam says that Moshiach will supervise, build the third Beis HaMikdash. It will not be Yored Min HaShemayim. But your question is, according to Rashi, why are people making the Kalim of the Beis HaMikdash? So there, I can give you a simple answer. The building will come down Min HaShemayim, but we still got to build the Kalim. It doesn't say the Kalim are going to come down Min HaShemayim. So we still have what to do. But the other thing is that all of the Mefarshim point out that Rashi doesn't, and they have rayas to this, Rashi does not mean every single thing is going to come down Min HaShemayim, because after all, building the Beis HaMikdash is one of the 613 mitzvos in the Torah. So it's impossible that God is going to do the whole thing without us, because we have a chiyuv to build a Beis HaMikdash, at least when Mashiach comes. So it means part of the Mikdash, a chelik of the Mikdash, maybe the Kodesh HaKadoshim, etc. Meaning even according to Rashi, there will still be a job for us to do, even in the Binyan Beis HaMikdash mamish. By the way, one other thing, the Rambam says beferish that there is no building of the Beis HaMikdash till Mashiach comes. That's what the Rambam says. But there's a Talmud Yerushalmi, which the Rambam doesn't paskin like, that actually says we first have to build the Beis HaMikdash, and that brings Mashiach. When Hashem sees we have such a yearning to serve Him that we build the Beis HaMikdash, that'll bring the Mashiach. That's like that Yerushalmi, there would be an enormous challenge. That actually would mean we should start building it now. Again, the Rambam relieves us of that chiyuv, but the Yerushalmi is a shita. So the people in the Temple Mount who talk about the extreme members of the Temple Mount movements who say, let's bomb the mosques, let's get rid of the mosques, and let's start building the Beis HaMikdash, they're somech on this statement in the Talmud Yerushalmi. Okay, maybe we'll stop here and thank you. Have a good